All right. So welcome and thank you guys for attending. We're just going over associates and their different career paths in this webinar. And we have some pretty awesome people with us. So we're just going to go through a few introductions and kind of get to know our panel a little bit more. Chris works in commercial real estate with CBRE. And CBRE's more than 100,000 professionals provide exceptional outcomes for clients in 100 countries by combining local market insight, broad services, specialized expertise, and premier tools and resources. So it's a pretty awesome company. And Chris, tell me a little bit about how you ended up in real estate.
Well, thanks for the introduction, by the way. I've been in the dental business for over 25 years now, started out on the supply distribution side. And then in 2014 was looking for a change. Still wanted to be involved with dental. So I went into the real estate side, got my licensing, started out focusing primarily on doing clinic sales and valuations, and then broadened my spectrum onto the retail side, helping dentists find locations, buy locations, lease locations. So my primary focus is healthcare, but I still do the day-to-day, pizza shops, hair salons, that kind of stuff. But healthcare is where I focus.
Amazing. So we'll move on to Ben. Ben guides people through their dental careers, advising and planning their futures with Deboski Company. That company's expertise is the design and innovative insurance-based financial strategies that accomplish that objective. So Ben, what do you like best about your role right now?
Oh, so many things. Well, first of all, the ability to do this with you guys. So this is awesome. So much fun. But thinking back to the way the world was even just 1 year ago at this time in the dental community, I mean, about a year and a month ago, we were at the height of fear as far as dental closures and when are we going to open and what's going to happen. But now I'm seeing so much optimism out there. And that's probably the greatest thing that I like about my role right now. There's a lot of things happening. There's a lot of clinics being bought and sold. There's a lot of clinics doing very, very well. And that is so exciting to see. And that's what makes my role very, very rewarding and fulfilling right now.
Awesome. Tom Christensen. Tom is the managing partner at Yates Whitaker. Yates Whitaker has been putting clients first for the last 25 years. The cornerstone of their firm is the personal relationships that they build. They build relationships based on trust, reliability, and assisting our clients to grow their business and personal security. But I think it's more like an accounting role.
Yeah, true.
Tom, how do you spend your free time? And I put that in there purpose because I know you don't have any.
Yeah, well, it depends how you define free. There's always, if I do this, then there's a cost over here. So it just depends. If I have free time, I'll usually try to get my mind to stop to spinning all the time. That's what I try to do. And so sometimes that is try to get deep into a Netflix series so I feel like I'm in there, or that is do something really mindless, like mow the lawn or whatever, where I can just think and nothing happens, or push my kids on the swing. Any one of those options, my brain will stop firing away. So I find that a necessary break.
That's awesome. And we have Brock on today as well. Brock works with Henry Schein as a sales rep, and Henry Schein obviously is a massive solutions company for healthcare professionals. They're powered by a network of people and technology with more than 20,000 team members worldwide. The company's network of trusted advisors provides more than 1 million customers globally with more than 300 value solutions that help improve operational success and clinical outcomes. Brock, what is driving you in your work right now? So what's really inspiring you in the dentistry world?
I think one of the themes that's going to come up quite a bit is teamwork and network and kind of attacking things as a group. Fortunately for me, I'm able to work with 11 people like me who are pretty much clones, and we all do the same thing, as well as 4 or 5 other people that we'll allude to kind of as we go forward with this, depending on what track we're referring to. We kind of have a gambit of people at Schein. but it all kind of revolves around business development. You would think we'd be a supply company, but really at the end of the day, we focus on either making things easier to do in a practice or focus on the growth aspect of things. So for, this group, especially associates and things like that, a lot of times you don't see your supply rep because they either talk to the person who's ordering stuff or they talk to the person who signs the checks. And what we want to do is we want to change that so that, we can focus on the growth for these associates. So either they're going to stay as an associate, or when they decide to move on and either own their own practice or build their own practice, they already have the tool set that they need to kind of be successful from the beginning and not have to learn the hard way and, fix those mistakes 3 or 5 years down the road.
That's great. And really plays into kind of why we're doing this here tonight, which is awesome. My name is Teresa Smith. I'm the owner of Optimized Dental. And basically what I do is similar to Brock, where I grow dental practices and I help and strengthen office managers so that they can manage their practices better by learning obviously a lot of leadership skills as well as the financial side and the business strengths to do that. So essentially I do that and I help kind of engage our dentists and the dental leadership team as well as associates in those practices to kind of drive the whole business forward. And so that's kind of what Optimized Dental does essentially. And my thing right now is I'm just dreaming of traveling soon. I just really want to travel like anywhere. I'm willing to go anywhere and I cannot wait. And apparently July might be when we can do that again. And I'm just like super thrilled with that possible opportunity.
Aren't we all?
Just before we get started, if you guys could go anywhere tomorrow, where would you head?
I would go to Hawaii if I could go tomorrow. Yeah, that's first place. On the beach, doing nothing, relaxing.
Yeah.
I would go to an indoor gathering. Any indoor gathering, anything at all.
See people face to face in real life.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds weird, but great. And without like this.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Or I don't look like the neighbor from Home Improvement. That would be amazing.
That's awesome. Okay, so in this summit, we're going to go over a few different tracks of what career paths look like for associates. And we've kind of just jazzed them up a little bit by using the Friends theme. And with that, I'm just going to start with track 1, and we're just going to kind of break it apart. Yes, perfect. Ben, show your cup again and talk just to make sure it was on speaker view.
There we go. Oh. Repping the Friends theme today. And for those of you watching live, today on Crave, the Friends reunion is released. So please stay with us till the end of this before you jump on that. That'd be appreciated.
Yeah.
Good sales pitch there, Ben.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, so the track 1 is we're gonna choose an associate, and her name is Phoebe LaFay. Phoebe has graduated from dental school and is looking for her first placement, no interest in building or buying a clinic in the future, just wants to make money and travel and live her best life. So kind of the things that first come to mind for me are that is if we're looking at a long-term associate plan, then they might need to plan down for their future a little differently than how they would how a dentist typically plans. And kind of the dental timeline that I'm familiar with is a dentist, becomes a dentist, buys a clinic, manages that clinic for however many years, and then sells that clinic off. And that's kind of their retirement plan. But I think with this plan, it would have to be something totally different. And I think there would be a different self-management guide you would have to go through as well, with production and kind of like your own development and personal motivation with that, just because no one's going to be driving that but yourself, to keep yourself focused and making sure that you're on track with those things. So I guess we can break it apart. What are some of the hazards, I guess, in that plan, and what are some things that that are great about that plan? Anybody can chip in at this point.
Well, I think a great thing about that plan is the lifestyle design is amazing. You kind of have your shifts that you're working, and then when you're done, there's not a lot of clinical concerns after that as far as staffing and real estate and marketing and all of those different things. So I'm actually seeing that that's becoming a more and more popular choice as far as deciding not to own clinics in the future, but just become an associate and kind of stay that way. The kind of work-life balance is pretty strong.
Yeah, not having a brick and mortar location type of thing allows you to, like Ben says, kind of live a more balanced lifestyle, but it also gives you opportunity that you're not tied down to a postal code. So if you want to work in Edmonton for 5 years, you can. If you want to go to the island, you can go work in the island. You can go work in Toronto. You can go do whatever, right? Very similar to, being able to travel and go, and you could potentially even work wherever you want. But it's very similar to also not owning a house, right? Like if you're going to rent your entire life, sure, that's great. You have some flexibility and some movement, but you don't have that asset at the end. So I think that's where, people like yourself, Ben, people like Tom, even using Chris's expertise as he did my job before he jumped over to doing the real estate stuff. I mean, there's a plethora of knowledge that you can kind of build the foundation if that's the route you're going to go.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I'm sure we'll get into it later on in this webinar, but a lot of associates will ask me, well, if I don't decide to own a clinic, what's the difference in income in my life? And the answer to that is lots. So clinical ownership certainly adds a lot of income, not only at the start, but at the end when you go to sell that clinic as well. But I'll certainly agree with you, Brock.
Yeah, I would say similar to that. I mean, with clinic ownership, you've got more risk because you're going to take on a certain amount of debt to buy it. And then from there, you've got the potential upside though of making much more and ending up with an asset to sell. And that kind of is because virtually every dentist, when they buy a clinic, is going to buy it with bank money, and the bank's going to force you to pay it back. It's kind of forced savings as well. And so you're building equity in your practice, and you have a thing to sell. When you're an associate at the end of it, you don't have a thing to sell. But if you have a good associate gig, then you might, and if you'd want to be financially careful with the funds that you have, right? There's no big sales price coming at the end of the day. So financial planning, using tax shelters, you probably save a lot of money in your PC over time because you'd fill up your RSP and TFSA buckets. And you'd look at things like, you might put yourself on salary and you're looking at individual pension plans, but that's kind of it. Like if you're an associate, you are mostly responsible for your own retirement with the money that's being paid to you. So being careful, or at least having a plan around it, is critical, because in the clinic scenario, you are building something and paying the bank back, which is forced, and you have a thing to sell.
I think the biggest thing for me that I see, because I don't deal with the banks and the finances and stuff, I deal with the day-to-day operations. Biggest thing I think for me is long-term associates generally will work for bigger corporations. They generally or work for someone that is going to feed them their dentistry, and sometimes maybe control what they are able to do and what not to do, or they have a little bit more governing on what they're doing, and you have a little less freedom as to decide sometimes on what you want. If you want two assistants, they might not be able to give you two assistants. That's your workflow. If you are, you're at the mercy of kind of whoever owns the clinic. And so that is a little bit different, I think, than when you're obviously the owner. You can decide what you want to do. You can decide where you want to spend your money. You have a little more leeway with that. And I mean, you still have responsibility, but it's just a little bit more leeway on your decision-making skills, on your day-to-day choices. You can decide. I know it just depends on the field that you're working in, but I know that a lot of times, everything has to get approved before you buy it. And it goes through a process and it has to be approved, and that's all good because we're watching our numbers and making sure. But like if a dentist wants to buy a certain product, it might be frustrating to them to have to go through all those steps and processes. Whereas if you own the clinic, you say, oh, this is what I want to use, and I go out and buy it. And it's just the decision that they make, and they incorporate it into their plans, which is fine. And it works the other way too. Maybe more dentists should think more about what they're buying too. And that's the flip side of that. But I think as a long-term associate, you have a lot less control sometimes about where you're working, and you're kind of sometimes treated more as an employee than you are a contract member of the team. So that can happen. And I think just, yeah, you have less control over your environment. If you hate your assistant, you can't get rid of them sometimes because that's not your choice.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. During COVID, when it first hit, we'd often debate on who would you rather be? Would you rather be the associate who's looking at it being like, well, if things don't shake out very well, how much is the principal dentist going to do? Are they going to leave me with any time? Or are they just going to be like, well, I can't afford to pay you, so I'm going to do all this work, and then what does the associate do? Or would you rather be the principal dentist, clinic owner, who has the obligation, the bank debt, the lease debt, you have all of these things to keep your clinic running? And so in which case, who has more risk there? The one has, the obligation to keep expenses going and to meet expenditures they can't necessarily defer, but the other one has risk of revenue. They don't control it. They don't own it. Dentistry is not like accounting, really. You can't just buy a computer and start typing on Excel. You need infrastructure. So which would you rather be? It was some interesting conversations, lots of nervous associates when COVID happened, and then lots of equally nervous or more nervous clinic owners. So it was really interesting to see the different dynamic as to who's in a better spot.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say to piggyback on what Tom was saying, like, you look at some of these practices and you hear it's almost like gambling. You only hear the wins, you never hear the losses, right? So you only hear these practices doing really well. And I've seen so many times where, an associate position getting paid 40% of their collections can be very much more beneficial than being a practice owner in some regards, because some practices don't clear the overhead that, kind of gets thrown around. So there are pros and cons and some things to look into, and much to the 40% of collections, if you're an associate in a practice who is terrible at collections, you're essentially working for free in some cases because you're not getting that money back. So it's other things to look at, when you're going to decide, is it going to be a long-term thing? You got to find the right fit, because, there are some fits out there that aren't going to be the right fit for the person.
I totally agree with that. And just even in my role, finding people places, sometimes that's totally what we do. You have to find the right fit, and knowing what the clinic is and the situation they're in. Even when associates come to me and they're like, hey, like I need to get out of the spot that I'm in. And I say, okay, well, tell me what's going wrong in your practice and tell me what you want in a practice, because every practice has something not going right in it. and that's fine as long as you don't care about that thing. And so just finding them the right fit, is essential, and making sure that, that you're getting the spot that works well for them. But collections seems to be a pretty important thing on everyone's list, because without collections, you don't get paid. And when you don't get paid, dentists don't get very happy, whether you're an associate or a clinic owner. Okay, so I think I'm good with that. Does anybody else have anything to chime in about Miss Buffet?
Well, I guess when it comes to Phoebe's position, I'll echo what Tom said. When it comes to the financial aspect, when you decide not to own a clinic, you really don't have anything financially to fall back on. There is no hygiene income that you can fall back on. There's nothing but your own billings. And so something like disability insurance becomes critically important at that stage, because if you can't, in fact, do the work yourself, there is no other income that you can fall back on. So you have to make sure that your long-term disability plans are certainly up to par. And then you do have to be wise about capital allocation, because you don't have an asset to sell when you go to retire that would, in fact, really help fund your retirement. So you really have to be conscious about how much you're saving and how much you're putting away, and how tax efficient you're being with all that.
Yeah, so I think their long-term retirement plan is going to be totally different. And how would we know where to start? What would we do? like, because I obviously don't know because I'm not associate, but like give us a quick rundown of like when we should be starting to look at those things, like 3 years out, 5 years out. Do we start like, I'm a dentist today, let's look at that right now?
Well, I mean, it's always advisable to connect with a good financial advisor pretty quickly. Financial advisor, insurance advisor. Even when it comes to paying down debt, you can do that in a really intelligent way. You can do that in other ways as well. And so when you're juggling your finances, no matter what time of your career you're in, I guess it's never too early to start working with somebody and start putting a plan together.
Awesome. I'm all about plans. We could get them going. Does anybody else want to chime in about Miss Buffet? Anything that we may have missed?
I'll keep going with what Ben said. So yeah, insurance protecting your hands, because that is what it is. Your defensive strategies might be slightly different, as well as I would say you got to be really conscious of what buckets you are placing money where. And so that's okay. Well, you might deal with debt in a different manner. And so some people really want to get rid of that as fast as possible. Whereas if you're a clinic owner, well, you should probably get used to that because you've probably got it hanging over your head for a good while. Whereas the associate usually will focus on dealing with that debt fairly quickly. And then after that, it's a matter of you get paid on time. The bank isn't, taking big principal payments out. And so it's a matter of, usually I find the ones that are most disciplined, they automate things. And so they'll say, okay, well, just use round numbers. They'll say, I make $300,000 a year. So that money goes into my PC. And then I want to get maximum RSPs and I don't spend too much money. So if I say $165,000 a year of salary gets my maximum RSP amount to be able to contribute. And they'll say, and then that also lets me take care of the student loans and the student lines of credit I have. And then they have this excess. And so do you pay more salary and put money into a TFSA? Do you pay more salary, put more money into an RRSP? Do you leave money in the PC and you want to buy some real estate or whatever you want? Your cash flow, your cash flow is much more predictable than an owner is. You don't have big cash outlays. So I find the associates that get into the groove of automating things, $1,000 a month goes to my TFSA, $2,500 to an RSP. I invest $3,000 in my PC a month or whatever it is, and you use $4,000 to reduce debt. They usually accumulate a fair amount of wealth pretty quickly if they're disciplined with it.
That's a good point, Tom. I find that maybe some sage advice would be to use your advisors, if you want to call it advisor, whatever it happens to be, but to make sure everything's in sync. So if you have a 3-year, 5-year, 10-year, 15-year, 20-year plan, whatever it happens to be, if you're working with, say, somebody like myself or one of our other reps at Schein, as well as Teresa, and you're looking at growing your existing practice that you're associated in, maybe the goals that, okay, I'm going to now start to see a financial increase here. What is Tom thinking I should do? What does Ben think I should do with this excess money? What outside avenues do I want to spend my money on? So many times we see people make investments and they start chasing that investment with their income. And they're not really prepared for it. It's just like, oh, I need to produce $112,000 this month because I got to pay for this stupid thing that I invested in or that I bought. And then they're just chasing the tail, right? They're not ahead of it. And when you don't have a practice to rely on, you don't have an asset to loan against, I mean, all you are is using your two hands to chase it. And it's very difficult to do.
It's very interesting that you phrased it that way. And I like it because I obviously am a goal setting planning person. That's what I do. And I really enjoy achieving goals. It's just like my thing. And I love when other people achieve goals too. I get very excited about it. And even just like learning to run a practice within another practice is really super important as an associate that's going to be a long-term associate. And I think setting production goals for yourself and attainable goals and developing your own patient base and working on that. One, it's super beneficial to a clinic owner to have an associate that does that. But two, building that out as a long-term plan. If you know that that's what you're going to do and you're like, you know what, I don't want to own a clinic, but I actually like where I'm working. I like the patients I work with. And I am now have these, financial goals that I want to retire at this age, and I want to have this much money put away for it. Structuring a plan of growth within your own practice that you don't own is still a really smart idea. And building that practice within a practice and coaching, either getting coached or having set goals so that you can stay on top of it. If you're really good at personal motivation, then you don't need someone to help coach you, but even just setting yourself up for success and saying, okay, this is where I'm at this month, and this is where I'm going to go here. And I'm going to make sure that every day I'm doing my daily huddles, and every day I'm doing this to make sure that my patients are getting the top quality care that they need. But in return, when you do that, have excellent care, it turns into production. That's just the way it works. And then reaching your goals and kind of getting where you want in the end, and then having the team on the back end helping you take that wealth and take that and manage it in a way that kind of gives you your retirement at the end of your career. Or, if you don't have insurance, if you have insurance, if you injure yourself, you have stuff set up for that. You have plans, and you're not kind of up crap creek without a paddle, for lack of better phrase. But essentially that's what it is. You don't want to be frustrated because you didn't plan in the future, and hindsight's 2020. But if you can have someone that has a little bit of foresight for you, that's super great. And even just my own company, I'm building that out now, and it can seem super overwhelming having all this information thrown at you and all these. I'm almost 40 years old, and I feel like I'm 60, and like I'm having these lawyers meetings and all these meetings, like it's crazy. And I just think, I don't even know what I'm doing right now as far as that end of things. And I feel like that can be very overwhelming, and I'm very empathetic towards an associate going through the same situation, because it would be very disconcerting to be like, oh, you have to, I'm out of school, I just figured out how to be a dentist, and now I have to plan for my retirement. And it seems like a lot, and it is a lot. But if you have people that kind of guide you and help you throughout the process, it seems like less. And finding the right people that can figure out what you want in this track, especially in this kind of career path, would be essential, because you don't have that big payoff at the end. You're going to really have to plan forward with this career path, and it's not unattainable. It just needs to be smartly planned out.
One point I'll make from a commercial real estate point of view is, because your income is all generated from your hands, once you start to accumulate a little bit of wealth, you may want to look at creating some passive income. And that might be through, ownership and investments in real estate, where you're a landlord and you have some tenants paying you rent every month, investing your money in that, as opposed to some other things that might not pay you back, acquiring some assets. Whereas you may not have a clinic asset, you will have some brick and mortar asset that you can sell at the end of your career. The other thing is, when you're not working as an associate, you're not generating any income, you're not getting any of the hygiene revenue. So it's really dependent on you being in the chair. So having some passive income is a great way to supplement your lifestyle as well.
Great point.
That's awesome. I think too that there's a lot of tax breaks that go in with real estate too. And I think, because as I'm planning my retirement, that's I'm like, oh, maybe I should buy some real estate in the long term, because I think it would be super helpful. Just passive income, and you hear about it on all social media or whatever. Passive income is the way to go. It just helps kind of long-term planning for yourself, which is an awesome way to look at that. Does anybody else have anything that want to pitch in about Miss Buffet? No, I think we've kind of tracked that out. Okay, awesome. So just to end this off, I think some of the things that we kind of want to look over, and I just like goals to set overall is like production targets, continuing education goals, paying off debt, and then investing strategies. So if people are on this and they want to write that down, those are kind of the main things that I think that are super important if that's your career choice, if you want to think about retirement and making sure you're staying on top of that. Okay, so if we go into track 2, which is Rachel Green, So Rachel Green has been practicing for 3 to 5 years and is ready to make the move into building her own clinic. She wants to have a beautiful location in a new part of town that's booming with new residential growth. So I think in track 2, we can right away go to Chris and we can talk about real estate and what that looks like for new clinic purchase. And I'll just let you kind of run the wheel on that.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and up until COVID hit a year ago, the plan definitely was to find the newest developments that were coming in new neighborhoods where you knew rooftops were going to be built over the next 5-10 years. Be the first doctor into the neighborhood and build that way. What we've seen happen over the last 14 months with businesses unfortunately going under and not being able to survive is we're seeing a lot of backfill opportunities. We're seeing a lot of mature neighborhoods now where maybe a dental clinic couldn't go before because it was 100% occupied. There's now opportunities to go back into those areas. And so that's, obviously location is the most important thing. We talk about this all the time. You either want to be in a brand new subdivision with a grocery anchor where the parking lot's going to be full from 8 a.m. till 9 at night, and now you're going to have a ton of exposure. You want to be on a major thoroughfare if possible. But now we're seeing a lot of these mature areas that there's openings up and the rooftops are already there. Obviously, there's other clinics that have been there for a while, so the competition is there as well, but you're not starting from a sort of a fresh neighborhood. So I think at the end of the day, the location's the most important thing. There's lots of great locations right now. The other thing you have to decide is if you want to be in rural Alberta or if you want to be in, Edmonton proper or Calgary, if you want to be in the suburbs or the core, right? They're all a very different demographic. Obviously, the core right now is not a strong choice with office buildings being at about 30 or 40% capacity. So I think for now, staying away from the core for the next probably 2 to 4 years is the right decision. But we're, since we've kind of opened up a bit last summer and fall, we've been really busy. We've been really busy with new locations. Lots of people are looking. I think people are realizing that they need to build themselves something that they can have for the future and make a long-term play.
Yeah, I think just to play off that, it's interesting because I've obviously on social media, I have tons of clinics on my social media, and I'm just looking through and how many new clinics have been popping up in different areas. And I'm always a little bit curious as to why they choose those areas and where they're coming in. And some of them are in like really, really new areas, like where the housing isn't even really finished. So I just have a quick question for you, Chris, like what, for those areas that were, like it's the end of the street, I guess, and they've built a strip mall and they haven't really finished the outside kind of like, I want to say the next phase of that area, like building a clinic in there, like is it a good decision at this point? Or like, if you're thinking like a long-term plan, like why is the interest going into those areas, I guess, at all?
Well, I think it's a long-term plan, and Tom and Ben can probably speak to this a little bit from the financial side. It's now that the doctor has accumulated some wealth and they're building this new practice in this new area, and they're using obviously, hopefully mostly bank money, but they're counting on the rooftops coming in because they've looked at the development plan for the subdivision, and they know within 2 years there's going to be 600 roofs with an average of 2.8 people in each house, and they're going to spend a ton of money marketing, and they're hoping to gather that group from that neighborhood. I think what happens a lot of times is it's a smart long-term play, and a lot of times the doctor who is building the clinic might initially open up 2 to 3 days a week there, try to fill their schedule and still supplement their income by associating at another clinic that they've either been at or somewhere on the other side of the city. But I really think, for the longest time, it's been a race to see who can get into the new shopping center development, and especially if it has a grocery store anchor. So typically, and I'll get a little bit into the leasing here if that's okay. What happens with these grocery store anchors is that the developer or the landlord won't even engage the smaller tenant uses at the start. They want to lock down their anchor. So, before there's even a sign in the ground, the anchor tenant, the grocery store, they're already in negotiations with the landlord. Once that deal sort of gets finalized or gets close to finalized, that is when you're going to start to see the sign up on the land that it's for lease. Now, in the meantime, associates like myself, whether it's at my firm or another one, have already been talking to, the Henry Schein guys, the Bens, the Toms, and saying, hey, we got this great new development coming up. It's going to be here in 2 years. Before this marketing material gets out, do you have any clients that you think are interested in this part of town? And, so the reality is, if you're looking to do something like this, you need to start preparing for it probably 2 or 3 years in advance before you actually make the physical move and open up your clinic, unless it's a backfill opportunity where there's an existing building already that you're saying, okay, I love that location. I want that location. How do we deal with this right now? So that was a long answer, but to answer your question, I think it's generally a race to get into the new neighborhoods, be the first person in. Hope you have 3 to 5 years before another clinic gets set up. And by that time, you're already established and have built up a good reputation.
Okay, awesome. I had a chat question come in for you, Chris. So, and maybe the group can answer partly as well, chime in. So they just asked, what do you think about buying some of these aging practices goodwill and moving that to a new location?
Well, we're seeing this happen. We're seeing this happen quite a bit because the older clinics, they don't have the technology that the younger dentists and the graduates want now. And so I think it's a great option if you can find a location that is close to the existing clinic. If you can buy that goodwill and move it over. The tough part is getting patients to move with you unless the selling dentist is willing to stay on and move to that new practice as well, because the staff and the dentist, that goodwill is, as Tom and Ben and Brock know, it's a number that's so subjective, and who's going to stay, who's going to leave, what's the attrition going to be. So if it makes sense, in my opinion, it's a good move. We've done it a few times. We've even combined a few older clinics into a bigger clinic, but the selling doctors stayed on in the clinic with the new buyer.
I think that's for me, and I just think of operationally and what that is, how that happens in a clinic. I think that's kind of an essential key part, is keeping those existing dentists in, because I was part of a practice that they bought from an existing clinic and they lost, the dentist took over and the other dentist, the retiring dentist stayed for, I think, a year or two, and they lost just a tremendous amount of patients right away. And I just feel like, that's the key, is to keep those goodwill patients in lockdown, is to have that dentist stay there for a little while. And I think 2 years minimum, just to make sure that's an easy kind of transition over, because you think about, a lot of people see their dentist, but they don't all come every 6 months. That. So even once a year, if they see that dentist again and they don't get introduced to the new dentist that year, then at least maybe there's an opportunity within the next year after that to get introduced that dentist, to kind of keep those patients retained at that clinic. Because quite often what I see is a patient will come in, and when met with the opportunity to see a new dentist versus a dentist that they choose, they might go to another clinic and choose a different dentist, being forced to see, as opposed to being forced to see the dentist that's just at the clinic that they might not have met before. And so if you're lucky to keep them, and just for retention wise, I think it's really important to keep that dentist on for a while. And I think that would help solidify that goodwill to stay in your patient base, because we all know the clinic value would go down in that situation, just because you're going to lose patients.
Yeah, and I will say one more point. It needs to make sense financially, because if you're buying a clinic, you obviously don't want to buy those leaseholds because you're not going to utilize them. You're leaving that physical location. And, the capital assets, the equipment, if none of it's movable or reusable, because you have to build a new clinic and outfit it all, you need to make sure that that makes sense financially. You don't want to pay for a full clinic just to move it down the street and then pay again to build a whole new clinic. So that's something to keep in mind.
It's a tough thing to do. I would say there's a fair amount of risk doing it. It's doable, but there's a lot that you'll have to be on top of, from my view. Like with, exactly what Chris was saying, is that, okay, you're looking at an appraisal and the value on there of an existing clinic won't just be goodwill. There will be some equipment that's valued at some point of whatever it is, and then the leasehold improvements will have one. So are you just walking away from that? What are you doing? And so that's really important, because now you've bought, if you think through the financial position you're in, you've bought assets you don't intend on using, leaseholds and equipment. And the thing that's left, the goodwill you have, well, you're about to move. And the dentist is also about to leave too. So you're like, okay, well, if the dentist's personal relationship with the patients and the location are critical to the goodwill, the only other factor there is really your staff, which is also, if you're coming in new and you're doing a paper purchase, you're coming in new and, okay, will the staff like me? Are the patients going to go 3 blocks down this way? And there's a lot there. So I would say that needs to be carefully thought through and forecasted out. And operationally, there's challenges. You're really busy. That's something that you'd want to be dealing with very carefully, because if I looked at it just an appraisal, I'm getting appraisals from Chris, and I see leasehold improvements is 150, and I see equipment is 230. And I look at the dentist who's with this plan, and they say, well, no, I like the lease is just gone. Well, you got to navigate through the bank, and that's also hard, right? Because the bank is going to give you the loan to buy this whole practice. They want to term it out over the lease, but you're planning on bolting. So, okay, well, that value is zero then. What are you going to do with equipment? I don't know what you do with used equipment. Maybe Brock, you put on Kijiji or something, or whatever you do with it. And so that's now going to zero, and then the goodwill's left. So you've already paid an extra few $100,000 for things you're not going to use. And now you're also going to, the thing that's left, the goodwill, you're going to move your staff, and will they like you or not in the first place? That's always a risk. You're going to move the patients, and will they like you or not in the first place? And you're going to move locations. So those are really the 3 elements of what it is. I wouldn't say it wouldn't work, but I'd say that would be something you'd want to go through the numbers very carefully and plan things out very carefully, communicate very clearly with the bank. So when I do cash flows forecasts and income forecasts for new clinics, that one, I would say, if this is your plan, if usually we spend 3 or 4 or 5 hours together going through it, like me preparing it and then talking with you, we're going to triple it, because this is not an easy maneuver to get everyone lined up.
I agree with you. And then, continuing on our topic here, the other thing is getting out of the current lease that the dentist might be into and try and get into another lease. And to Tom's point, when you're looking at a clinic, and I know we're not talking about clinic purchases in this track, but the banks are looking for, a 10-year lease or an option for a 10-year lease, so that they know they can amortize those leaseholds over that term. So, when it comes to the leases, you have to make sure the landlords are on board, that there's no issues as far as getting out of what you're currently in and getting into a new one and negotiating that new lease, which is also a complication. So it is a very, very tricky process. And, it's tricky enough just to start a new clinic on your own and work your way through a premise lease and the basics, and kind of understanding how to go through all of that as well.
Chris, if somebody's thinking about building a new clinic, is there anywhere or any resources they could access as far as population growth in an area, potential population growth, how many dentists are already in a certain area per person?
Yeah, right here. You can use me. We have a fantastic research team at our office, and they can pull demographics on everything that you can imagine. The promotional decks that we put together are phenomenal, so we can get you where the city's going, how it's going to develop, what the estimated population is, the time frames, the traffic counts, all that kind of stuff. We can definitely pull that for you and help you guys, get any kind of information you can imagine, income, all that stuff, schools, where the schools are going, where everything is going. Yeah.
With that information, then I just have another question. With that information, then Tom, would you be able to kind of project what that clinic success would be like, or like how does that work for a new build on your end? Like if someone comes to you and says, I'm building a clinic now, I have a space, and like, because now there's like all the banking stuff that goes in with that, and like what would be the next steps once they are like, yeah, this is kind of, we picked our location and this is what we plan on doing, like where do we go from there?
Yeah, it's a really, and I've tossed around having a big roundtable discussion with a builder, a distribution rep, a real estate person, designer, everyone there, and and lawyer, just to figure out what's the best steps here, because it usually ends up like it's really stressful. You're going to spend the most money you've ever spent in a short period of time ever, and probably will ever. And it's high pressure because, from the lawyer's perspective and the real estate agent's perspective, they want to put in a competitive, what would that be, Chris, an offer to lease, right? So you're not going to say, hey, give me 4 months conditional on financing. The landlord is going to be like, nope, don't want to do that, right? I don't want to take this off the market for that long. Like, no, figure it out. And so now you're putting in an offer to lease, and then you're going to hope the real estate agent's can get some extensions, because that's almost always inevitable, because when you think of all the stuff you have to go through, in order for me to forecast out a clinic, I have to know what equipment's going in there, because that's what we're asking the bank to finance. I also have to know what the construction cost is. Well, we don't know that until you pick it. And so if you've got an offer to lease that's 1 month, it's like, okay, well, you've got to figure out design, what you're doing here, there, wherever. So there's no perfect, it's just stressful. And so I would probably assemble your team early and be like, okay, I'm looking for a clinic. And then I would start building the skeleton of a forecast. And a forecast is a thing that I personally try to avoid using templates on. It's too dangerous. You're going to spend the most money you have in your life, and it's like, oh, well, this formula is just off, and I just jammed this in here. I generally am like, okay, this is very critical. How long did you, like, this is one of, if not the biggest financial decision you're ever going to make. You probably should pay very close attention to what your business plan is and make sure your business plan syncs with what the forecast is. So I would probably say, I like to talk early and say, who are you? What's your vision? Is your vision going to be an 8 operatory clinic? So you're going to furnish 3 and plumb for 8, or are you going to, no, smaller? It's going to be here. What's your feel on staffing? Do you have some liquidity built up? Are you going to staff with a receptionist, an assistant, and a hygienist out of the gate? Banks typically don't like that, but maybe you're like, nope, I've got full confidence. I've got a war chest saved up over here. I'm going full staff, and I'm working here full time because I don't want to be an associate somewhere else just in case a patient shows up and I can't service them. What is your plan there? What's your financial circumstance? And I build the skeleton of the forecast. And I would say, okay, you got to find the location now, and that's where all of the things will start to backfill. And then we'll look at our forecast assumptions. Even I'll talk to them with, well, what's your marketing plan? You have a marketing person, how much are you going to spend per month? The bank wants to know those things. And so then, you'd say, okay, well, now go see Chris and find a location if they've kind of pinpointed one. And then Chris would say, that's it. Then you've got to get construction people in there in a hurry. You got to get Brock in there in a hurry to be like, okay, here's what we're looking at. Brock's ideally already met with them. It's like, okay, these are ADEC people, or these are Serona people, or whatever brands they're looking at. And yes, they want a CEREC, and yes, they want a CBT, or no, they don't. And he's kind of got that in his head and kind of templated, costed out. And then that's got to make its way to me. The construction person's got to be ready, got to know and in touch with, and you've picked them, saying, I'm going to look for spaces. You got to help come with me to go through these spaces to see if there's big issues, right? And what costs I'm going to be when I demo it and build it back up. And then I'm going to be bugging them right away saying, I need your number to put in this forecast. Without it, those are the biggest costs we have, and that will determine our debt payment, which is critical and depends on when the bank's going to give it to you. So it's kind of just a stressful ball of months, or a month, really. Sometimes it's really compressed, and that to me that would be unsettling if I was a dentist. And so knowing that that's what I'm in for, I'd want to do as much pre-work as possible. I mean, it's like, yep, I'm working with Brock at Henry Schein on the, on the equipment. I'm working at Natter at GH on the construction. And Chris is going to be my person to find it. Tom's going to forecast it. I've got a good banking relationship with RBC. I'm going to put them on notice that, hey, I'm looking for something. Can you give me kind of, based on my financial position now, can you give me kind of a shopping permission amount? And they'll say, well, we need a forecast to really get that. And then I'll say, well, I can't do the forecast until you pick all those things. So it's not a very linear process. It is just talking to a whole bunch of people at once. And then that's not even considering all the operational stuff you have to think of and set up, right? Hiring, all that sort of stuff. So it's a stressful period of time. And if it were me, I'd say I want my team in place and I am comfortable working with these people. And so when they decide to say go, you put in a strong offer to lease and you can get it done in a relatively short period of time.
Yeah, you hit a lot of good points there, Tom. There's some things, when you look at forecasting and those types of things, where when we have an idea of what the goals are, what the spends are, what the budget is, what the term of the loan is, all those different things, we can really start to plan what the future of that practice looks like. But we can't do that stuff if we don't follow and we don't time it properly. So I think you're bang on when you say, getting the right people in place and working as a team. And I think the execution of building a practice is probably 50% of it, and the timing's the other 50. Because if you miss a step or you go in the wrong direction, you can get stuck with pillars in the middle of buildings. You can, get unfavorable lease rates, those types of things. So there's just a lot of things to watch out for when you're when you're looking at, building a practice. And I think that's where, if you can get in with, the likes of the four of us early, at least you can get some guidance as to, to what to watch out for. And then if different areas you can succeed in and potentially condense spend and all those types of things.
Yeah, and Tom, I'll just make one point. Landlords coming out of this pandemic have been much slower to react for the leases. So the reality is we're probably not going to get anything done within 3 months because the landlords are taking a long time to get back, and they're doing a lot more due diligence, as are the tenants, right? Everyone's being a lot more careful. We're starting to see pandemic clauses put in. There's usually some indemnities in there. Some landlords are willing to not have an indemnity for larger security deposit, but it's moving a lot slower. I've been working on a couple leases now since last July, and we're just getting the paper now for the final lease, and we're just getting it back to the client's lawyers. And so I anticipate we're another month out before we even get to signing off on the lease, on the premise lease. Now, with that being said, this is a space that's not going to be ready until July 2022. So this is to my point, how long it takes to kind of get the space you want. You need to start looking early. And then when it comes down to the actual lease, there's more obviously than just what the base rate is and, what kind of tenant improvement allowance you're going to get. You want to make sure you have a favorable, and your lawyer, you need a good lawyer who's going to help you with all that wording too. You want to make sure you have a favorable lease for the tenant and it's not just landlord heavy. You want to make sure you have good renewal options, good renewal terms, reasonable times to respond on those renewals. It sounds very complicated. We do this all day, every day. The 4 or 5 of us here in this group. So for us, it's very methodical how we go through this process. But you do need to make sure you engage us early so that we can make sure that everything is done properly and that you're covered on all ends.
And much to that point too, Chris, like a really, really fast build would be 9 months to a year.
Yeah.
Like that would be electric from the first time you talk to a bank accountant, a distribution rep, a real estate agent, whatever it be. If you can do it in under a year, that's like warp speed and you're probably going to miss something. So this is a process that does take quite a bit of time and quite a bit of due diligence. And, you know, Tom probably alludes to it more frequently than anybody. It's going to be the biggest purchase you ever make. It's about $1.4 million to build a dental clinic right now. And you're going to sign probably another $1 million lease over 10 years with another 5 and 5 hanger on it. Like, you're not going to buy a house for 2.5 million, but you just bought a practice for 2.5 million over 10 years. Right. So that's something to think about when you're going through this process. It is a large purchase. So you want to make sure that the people who are doing it are experienced and can assist you along the way.
Yeah. Usually there's lots of pressure too. And that to me is always the factor of like, okay, if that was me looking at that, I mean, you're committing to spend $2.5 million in lease payments and to build the thing. Like, I'd want to alleviate as much pressure as possible by putting people in place who can move quickly and who already know roughly where you're speaking, or where you're aiming, so it doesn't feel panicked and rushed, because it's a really, I think it's usually a fairly pressure packed time, and also too, like, you're busy doing stuff typically. Like, nobody's sitting there being like, I decided to buy a practice, so I'm gonna quit my job and I'm gonna focus on building a practice for 3 months. That's not how it works. You're juggling a whole bunch of different things. You're working here, you're working there, you're trying to keep all these plates going, you're trying to write a business plan, you're trying to do that. So if you're Rachel Green, I would say, Rachel, get your team in place to do this so you make as calculated of a decision as possible, without a lot of stress and pressure. And that is usually done by putting your team in place. So, and you're talking to all your people, Ben, you know what? I'm going to get a $1.5 million build here. I'm going to need some life insurance, and I don't want to show up a week out of the lease date. And then the bank say, well, we need life insurance to do this. And then Ben says, well, I have to have somebody come check you out. Like, you're 2 months away. And so then you're stuck buying the bank's very overpriced insurance, but perhaps it's priced fairly because they don't have time to do due diligence on your health sometimes, right? So getting all those your team in place to do it, and talking to everybody and letting everyone know that's what you want to do, I think is the most important thing for Rachel.
I completely agree. And I mean, this is going to take more time than what you think it's going to take. It always does. And there's so many things to consider, as you've heard everybody else talk about. And I think that every clinic is different and every location is new and it's exciting, but there are so many things that have to happen the same way in every one of these. And working with a team that's done that many times is extremely important, because they can take a lot of the headaches off of you. As Tom mentioned, like, even to get the loan for the bank, you need life insurance already in place in order to assign for that loan. And Tom mentioned about kind of quote unquote overpriced bank insurance. That's called creditor insurance. But for the most part, they can, most banks will only go up to $1 million on that. So you still will need some supplementary insurance, and you already need that in place. The other kind of insurance piece to consider for new clinical builds is that if you, again, become disabled, much like the Phoebe Buffet illustration we were giving before, if you become disabled, the thing that's going to be now the greatest drag on your income is not your personal expenses, where you might have some personal long-term disability insurance. The biggest drag on your income now is going to be all of these clinical costs, leasing costs, and all of this staffing costs that you have now gotten yourself into as an investment, which is amazing. But if you can't be a dentist there, you should consider something called office overhead disability, whereby basically your practice has bought some monthly income if you can't practice dentistry either. So a lot of things to consider. It's going to take longer than what you think it's going to be, but it's an exciting ride, and it's going to be well worth the while if you can get the right people around you and make it work.
I think that's essentially the key. And I think that goes as far as the right people around you, and then building your team at the clinic level. And just even getting operational advice on, I mean, you've never started up a clinic. When you buy a new or buy an existing practice, you already have all of your structures in place. You have all of your systems in place because they're already going, and you're just walking into something. Whereas if you're building your own practice, it's really great because you have complete control over exactly what you want to do, but it also means you have 1 million different ways you can go. And sometimes that can cause its own set of problems. So I'm just working with someone that's opening a clinic right now, and she just constantly emails me, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? What do you think about this? And I just go, okay, I wouldn't do this. This is going to create problems. I would do this. And just having someone in your field, and I can think this works the same way for Chris and Tom and Ben and Brock, is just having someone that can help you guide through those situations quickly and make good decisions and mitigate risks like really fast, as opposed to, making a whole bunch of little bad decisions. Just saves you time and it saves you money in the long run. So getting those people locked down in your team and helping them work through that. Someone just asked a question, and I think it says, can I just use term life insurance instead of whole life to keep my costs low? Yeah, Ben, you answered that, but maybe just answer it on the thing as well.
Yeah, I just tried to type a response to it. Not sure if that worked, but yes, obviously, yes. If you're going to do a build out of a clinic, for the most part, we're going to try and choose the least cost versions of things that we can, because there's going to be a lot of things that call for your money at those periods of time. So term insurance is used, I would say, 99% of the time for clinical build loans. We would use term insurance, something called 10-year term insurance for the most part.
There's going to be some areas as well post construction. So once you actually have your clinic built, it's not like buying a clinic where there's cash flow. You're going to look at projections, and like when I do projections for new builds, the first few months are $15,000 income. Like that's not income take home. That's income. You got $60,000 expenses and you're making 15 grand. So you're in the whole 45, right? So there's different things where in the first 6 months of your practice, you're not going to have that cash flow. So you want to look at, growing patient base and doing those fundamental things while also protecting yourself with maybe a larger operating line of credit and those type of avenues that you would want to look at on top of the insurance aspect, on top of making sure Chris hooks you up with a lease and Tom's got, your best interest in mind in terms of what you can, spend, what you need, maybe what your long-term financial plans are, those types of things. There are going to be some landmines you're going to want to dodge, and you're going to make sure you have a parachute, because you are jumping off a big cliff with no income. So you want that parachute to be real sturdy. And that's something that I think everybody in this group can help with, is not just growing the business once you've established it, but also making sure that, you're in the best position that, if we do need to bring somebody on because a life situation happens, you're covered in terms of disability, or, we do have enough overhead wiggle room that we can bring an associate on if you need to take 3 months off for whatever reason, or, if you're a female dentist and, you're pregnant, you need to take care of those types of things. You don't really plan for that when you're building a clinic, but it could come up 1, 2, 3 years down the road. Do you have something in place that, is there? Are you talking to the right people to plan and make sure your business is still thriving? Because once you sign on the dotted line, you're kind of, it's yours. You can't really get out of it. So I think that's one area too that you really want to focus on.
That's a great point, Brock. Is there anybody else that wants to chip in on Rachel Green, or should we move on to Mr. Bing?
Well, I just want to give a shout out to Brock and how I'm thoroughly enjoying all the background changes, keeping it very
I agree.
It's like, where's Waldo?
Where's he going to be next?
I keep hitting dead spots and my thing freezes, so I got to find a hot spot.
I'm waiting for him to show up at your house, Ben.
Yeah,
that's right.
No, I think he'll be on the golf course before he goes to Ben's house. Okay, someone else wrote, if I buy an existing clinic, how easy is it to swap out? Okay, wait. If I buy an existing clinic, how easy is it to swap out for new equipment? Is it a huge expense?
I guess I'm probably the first person to talk about this. It is a large expense. It's something that you want to plan for. So typically you're going to find appraisals, and Chris can talk about, buying an existing practice and the appraisals and kind of the value of what an appraisal is versus what the bank will loan. But you are going to probably need, if you're going to re-outfit 5 chairs, a pan, and some sensors, you're probably going to need 250 grand. So if you're barely squeaking by to get that 1.5 million to buy the practice, it might not be feasible to do the 250 grand. If you want to do a large scale renovation, one thing you got to keep in mind is, you can buy the walls, but if you got to shut down for 3 months, are you going to keep the patients that were there? Or are they going to go across the street because they can't get in to see you? And then what's that attrition look like in your practice? So if you are going to buy something and renovate it, I think you got to maybe talk to a few people and figure out what the plan looks like. Is it feasible? What's the time frame? And what's the benefit of doing it? Have we done it before? Yes, we do it all the time, but we want to make sure that we're not falling into those pitfalls while we're doing it.
Yeah, so to add to Brock's point, we're going through this right now with a clinic that we just sold, and it's a nice clinic, but the buyer wants different equipment, wants different chairs, wants stuff that that the dentist is used to working with, and so what we did is the dentist brought in the contractor that they're going to use and sort of did a preliminary walkthrough as to how they were going to stage the changes. And Brock can speak to this more than I can. Obviously, the plumbing needs to be right if you're switching out chairs, depending on what's on the chairs or what's on the cabinets. And so that's why you need to get a contractor in there before you make the decision. If you're set on putting certain equipment in, to make sure that you don't have to core new holes through the concrete, or if you do, is it even possible to tie into the existing lines? Because the last thing you want to do is, buy something and then realize you need to switch everything out. And then it's a whole new build, essentially, where you're redoing all the plumbing and electrical. So I would advise that you come in with your Henry Schein rep, and you come in with your contractor, and between the two of them and yourself, you can decide which equipment you want. Contractor will know if it works, and then you continue the discussion from there. So it's very similar to what we've been talking about. It's making sure you're prepared for what's coming down the road before you actually go down that road.
And to your point,
go ahead, bro.
To your point too, Chris, I would love to be in that conversation from the very beginning. So if you're talking about doing an appraisal, for instance, Chris, not only are we looking at the equipment, but we can look at the computers and see what kind of upside there is in the practice, and do a full audit on, okay, you want to make some changes here. Good, we can make these changes, but you're also walking into a very opportunistic practice, or there's times where these practices are for sale and there's just nothing left in them, and the appraisal might show well because there's a good financial history, but there's just not a lot of upside in it. So depending on what you're trying to do, there can be some benefit to having your team come in at the very beginning and doing an assessment on not just the equipment, but also on the charts and those types of things, and really finding out the guts of the practice from both the plumbing perspective as well as goodwill and attrition of patients.
Yeah, and I think planning is super important in that. Like, the earlier you can get your team in there to kind of advise you, the better. I was just at a practice not that long ago, and they are asking me questions about potentially getting rid of this practice because it wasn't doing very well. And they said, well, is it worth it to sell? And I said, well, how much do you want to lose off of it? Because you can sell anything, and that's okay. You just have to be willing to be okay with what the loss is, if that's what you want to do and you want to sell it right now. And then they said, well, okay, well, what do you think is it worth fixing? And I said, anything's worth fixing if you want to spend the money and time in there. So it's just, you have to kind of go through what you're willing to do to make a practice work, how much work and effort you want to put in, because there's value in a lot of things. If you're willing to grind, 24 hours a day and make it happen and put a lot of sweat equity into things, you can make a lot of practices that aren't doing well go super well. But the truth of the matter is, a lot of people just don't want to do that. They want a practice that's going to, take off fairly quickly. And there's all of those measures, and it depends really on the person, on the dentist in the practice. And I think, really going back to what Tom said before, what's your vision, right? Because if your team doesn't know your vision, they can't guide you to what you want and what's kind of like the best case scenario for you, because it might be really great for, Joe Blow because he doesn't have a family, and he's, in his career, and maybe his parents paid for all of his university and he doesn't have any debt. And maybe he, worked at a great practice and has a lump sum of money to dump into and build a practice from scratch. And that's okay. But that might not be the same life situation for another dentist who maybe has school debt, maybe has a young family, and can't put in 18 to 20 hours a day at the clinic to kind of transition that clinic over and kind of getting that sweat equity out of it. And just looking at those things. So kind of getting your team to know you early doors is super important, because then they'll know exactly what you're willing to do, what risks you're willing to take, and how you want your vision to play out. And the better you know your team, and the better your team knows you, the better they can advise you on what you got long term.
Yeah, that for Chandler's situation of buying an existing practice and looking at it on paper, those are, and Chris might not like me saying this, but or he probably doesn't care. He's a pretty transparent guy. He works for the seller, right? Like, seller's engaged him, seller's paid the bill, he's doing appraisals, he's gonna put it up and try to sell for what he thinks the market will bear, the absolute maximum. And so if Chandler comes into my office and says, well, I'm looking at all these different appraisals, what do you think of them? Oh, I've heard this company's high and I heard this company's kind of lower, this company's reasonable. Like, oh, it's all that stuff. I won't say an appraisal is irrelevant, because it is relevant, but it is oftentimes, when I look at helping Chandler make a decision, it's like, this practice it's worth different things for different people in different, it's not worth the same thing to dentists. One dentist might be like, oh, I can use all this stuff, it's perfectly fine. The other dentist says, oh, I need $400,000 of leasehold improvement, CBT, CEREC, stuff. I'm like, okay, well, the sticker price on it's $2 million, and you need to make $400,000 of changes, it's actually $2.4 million in order for you to make it work. And so how is it valued? Like, is it right for you? You're looking at on paper some of the procedures. Can you do all of those procedures? If you can't, then we're gonna have a problem, because some of the procedures the prior dentist did and the revenue that covered a lot of overhead might disappear, or you're gonna have to pay that dentist an associate fee to continue to do them. And so whenever I see somebody who's a Chandler who's looking at different appraisals, it's not about, is this appraisal too high or too low, or what is it? That the market kind of determines that. It's really, what's it worth to you? That's what it comes down to. Some people are willing to cannibalize their associate pay, your 40% collections, to have a location they don't have to drive very far to. They're just willing to do that. That practice is worth more to that dentist than somebody who is not willing to do that. So it really just, it's all about, Chandler, how much is this practice worth to you? It's not about how the prior dentist ran it. That's going to be a factor. But if you plan on changing it because you're going to offer orthodontics, or you don't do whatever it's going to be, what impact does it have on the future? What future money are you planning on spending there? And that's where, in the fourth track, when we get to that, that's where that dentist has a big advantage over Chandler, because Chandler is going to put his impressions on the practice somewhere, change things, and you have to get your lender on side with that. You have to forecast out how it looks and what you're committing to.
Yeah, I would go as far as to say that if you're buying a practice that is new to you, it's been running well already, and you're going to buy it, a year from now, that's probably going to look a lot different than what you bought. Everybody will put their own flavor on the practice when you buy it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot of things too coming in cold to a practice in terms of what's the staff look like, what are the conditions on sale? Are you responsible for severance? Are they? What's the breakdown of procedures? Tom talked, what's the value to Chandler to buy it? Would you pay more for location? Would you pay more for this? Would you pay more for that? But, being a heady buyer as well is going to be huge. Is it a hygiene producing practice? Because hygiene production is relatively overhead free if you got to carry another associate. If that person wants to stay on for 2 years, what kind of money are you taking in? What kind of money are they taking in? Does the forecast appreciate that expense, or does it not? And if it doesn't appreciate it, and you can say, okay, well, now I'm not making any money out of this thing. Why'd I ever buy it? I'm working twice as hard and making no money whatsoever. I just left a gig where I was making 40 grand a month. I made the biggest mistake of my life. There's certain things that you really want to kind of cover off. And I think Tom kind of hit the nail on the head. Like, the appraisals are great and they're needed, but there's a kind of a self-reflection and maybe an interview process with your advisors to say, what really do I want out of this and what is reasonable out of this location? Because going in there and just blowing up cold turkey and changing everything isn't going to happen overnight. And you could probably appreciate that, Teresa.
Yep. Nothing happens overnight. And I shouldn't say that. You can do things very quickly. There's just a lot of risk to doing things and moving very fast. I have blown up so many clinics now that I have learned how far to push people and how fast you can move things along, just from experience. And I just feel like everyone has great intentions when transitioning a clinic, but there's a lot of dynamic that happens just with the people aspect of transitioning a clinic over. And there's a lot of risk that moves into that. And I think you can move it fast, and that's super great, but you might lose staff, you might lose patients, you might lose confidence in yourself and your own abilities. There's a lot goes into that, but I think if you're going to do something and kind of like Phoebe, if you plan and you set your goals and you build something sustainable, then it works, and you can build it with a long-term goal in mind. You can slowly move towards that long-term goal, and it's going to be sustainable structure and sustainable growth. But you can't really do it very quickly if you want it to be sustainable, because you can do things fast, but they tend to not stick, because people quit or things just don't stay because no one's holding anyone accountable. There's just so much that goes into doing that. But I think buying an existing clinic, for me, and on an operations side, seems a little less risky if I was doing it, just because you are going to something that's already structured, and it's only because my own comfort zone of being able to control the operation side of things. And for operations wise, the structure is already built. You can tweak the structure, but it essentially will run. You can build on it, but it's there already, the base structure, and you can kind of manage it a little bit, and you're not forcing yourself to learn and change at the same time. And mostly why people bring me into clinics is because dentists are super great at being dentists, but they're kind of struggle being managers, and they don't have time, or maybe they don't, again, want to put the sweat equity into spending 8 hours in the dental chair and then maybe 2 hours managing the clinic afterwards. And so they need strong office managers, or they need someone to help keep their team accountable. And essentially that's why I have jobs, is because that's what I do, is keep people accountable. The dentist doesn't always have time to do that. And if they do have time to do that, that's also a problem, because that means they're not making money while their operations are open. And so it's kind of a catch-22 in that situation. We just had a question that came up as, other than procedures the current owner isn't doing that I can, how do I find out what other growth opportunities there are in a clinic?
So there's a few different ways to do it. Basically, you can look at, okay, here's a procedure analysis. This person's not doing this, or I really like to do this, or, what, I'm not capable of doing molar endo, and the original doctor was. But if you run what we have at Schein called a practice analysis, it kind of gives you a snapshot of what the practice is doing. And it shows you the opportunity within the practice based on the standard of care that you would like to implement into the practice. Standard of care is a word that I think people throw around a lot, but they don't really implement into a practice. So if one practice is doing X and you want to change it to do Y and your standard of care is different, we can understand the opportunity based on what your standard of care is. Further to that, if you want to go deeper dive, you can start looking at really, really hardcore analytics of production per provider, production per hour, empty chair time, all these different aspects that, you know, everybody at Schein talks about and works with their practices on, but Teresa can also look at from the back end, from an operational standpoint, and go, you know what, the AR is a mess here. We're scheduling at an efficiency rate of like 70%. We're doing these different things. There's huge opportunity in that practice. Are you willing to put the work in to go appreciate that opportunity?
I think when you're buying an existing practice too, it's like your due diligence is like super important, because it's going to kind of go into what that practice is already doing. And then I think, yeah, just looking through what your typical production per hour, and you can go from the clinic that you're currently working in, if you are working as an associate, and kind of gauge what you normally do, and then look at the patient demographic and see what the dentist is doing in that clinic. And if they have even been exposed to a different standard of practice or standard of care, right? Because someone that has never done ortho and has only referred out ortho in their clinic for 10 years, if you go in and you're like, I do ortho, you know, like, has those patient base even been talked to about ortho, or have just been like, here, ortho, if you want to do it, you can do it. Here's the referral, go on your own and do it. Or do you just find your own orthodontist and they just kind of do that? So you were able to maximize that kind of production on that side. It same goes for like root canals. Do you use the dentist that currently exists there now? Do they do root canals? If they don't do them, and they've been referring everything out, then there's room to grow there. So there's lots of different angles that you can look at very specifically. And I think it's a good idea to kind of analyze that before you purchase that, because I think it gives you an idea where the growth is, but also gives you an idea of what's been happening in the history in that clinic and what those patients have been exposed to, because patients, as we know too, can be a little bit conservative if they've been with a conservative dentist for a long time, and then you come in and you're like, oh, well, you need to do a COE and you need to make sure we're going to do full series x-rays, and you haven't had ortho before, but you should probably get ortho, and these teeth need veneers, and I don't know why your dentist didn't talk to you about these fillings. They, been watching them for 3 years, but we should probably get those done. Sometimes that kind of aggressive nature as a dentist has a very off-putting effect on your patients too. So kind of keeping that in mind too, that if the dentist has been very conservative and you're, I would say, more on the assertive side of dentistry and like top patient care, then that can conflict and can cause some issues on the operational level as well. But yeah, there's lots of things that go in that dynamic for that. Tom, I think, do you do due diligence before practice, and what does that look like when you're purchasing?
Usually the lawyer and I will work on that quite a bit, and I'll usually encourage them to work with someone like Brock to be like, okay, dive in there, see if you can get the Dentrix software, whatever software it is, and pull out some more analysis to identify where opportunities are. And that's an interesting question, because oftentimes the banks oftentimes drive a lot of the mandatory due diligence, because the bank holds the keys, right? So if you're buying, like in Rachel's, if you're going to build new, in Rachel's example, bank's going to say, I need all these things, and then once it's in place, then I'll fund you. So until you tick all the boxes, and they'll make you do a forecast, they'll make you usually get a construction quote, and then they'll want like a firm construction quote, and they'll want all of those things. That due diligence process is driven by the bank. And when you do that, the risk is all in the revenue. Because when I start, you're like, okay, what's your patient going to be? How much are you going to charge a patient? Well, how much are you going to make the first month? Like that's where the risk is. The rest of it's fairly mathematical, because it'll become known. Well, your rent is this, and your supplies are going to be 6 or 7%, and your lab is going to be 10 if you don't have a CEREC, and we also know when you're going to hire people and what you're going to pay them. So the expense side's math. In a build, the risk is all in the revenue. So when you're looking at buying, you're like, okay, well, look at the financial statements. This existing practice always produces this. And so when I do my due diligence. I don't know if it's really, well, it's depending on the structure of the deal can drive different due diligence. That's kind of a loaded word. The first thing I do with somebody is say, let's look through this appraisal and let's still do a forecast. And it doesn't have to be as in-depth one as Bill does. The bank doesn't require the forecast. And I say, well, the bank doesn't require it. So, why would you want to pay to do it? But I find it's a valuable tool because you're going to put down like, okay, in the appraiser has laid out the following assumptions. Like, do you agree with that? And also, is it still a cost? Because sometimes, appraisers will normalize different things. They'll say, oh, well, professional development's the responsibility of the dentist. Okay, but you still have to pay it. So they're adding it back to come up with a bigger number that's being multiplied, but you're still going to do professional development. And if they add back a $20,000 PDC trip every year, because they're like, well, that's discretionary. Okay, are you going to be the dentist that takes that away when you take over? Because I'm betting the staff's used to that. So you're going to actually still have to pay it. So you also have another expense that they didn't have to pay, the bank, right? So you want to understand, like, okay, I see how the values come up with. What are you actually going to change? And how much excess cash flow you have, and if you can meet your bank requirements is really what drives a lot of that due diligence. In an acquisition, there's more things to look at. There's deal structuring, right? Are you buying assets? That's one set of due diligence. Are you buying shares? That's another set of due diligence. Are you gonna try to do both and do a hybrid? Well, that's another set of due diligence. It depends on what the structure of the deal is, and that'll drive a lot of the due diligence. Also, I couldn't do a chart audit. I have no idea what those mean. But you should probably look at those charts. If they're treating in a way that you don't agree with, then that's going to impact the revenue. I can't read that. The appraisal is not going to be able to tell that. So there's lots of things that go into due diligence. And then of course the big items are usually surrounding, I always believe, the risks in the revenue. The rest of the stuff you can limit your risk on, but the revenue is where it lies. Everything falls out from there. If you're really busy, you'll hire more. If you're not very busy, you will look to decrease expenses. And so it's really, forecasting is what the usual tool I use. If you're buying shares, if Chandler shows up and he's like, I'm going to buy this practice and it's shares, well, you're inheriting all that dentist's old potential tax problems. So I've got one right now. This guy bought a practice. This guy bought practice it's probably been 6 years ago. And it was a hybrid deal. It was complicated. Got everything done. There was holdbacks. Well, it turns out, 2 years later, the selling dentist gets reassessed with a tax bill of $60,000. And so we get that bill and we're like, well, this relates to your tax positions. So here, please pay. And they said, yeah, okay. And then they didn't. And then CRA is like, hey, what's going on? Well, I don't know. Let me check. The guy said they would pay it. Nope, just not going to pay it, not going to respond. And then CRA says, okay, new owner, this is your problem. You own it. This is your problem. You pay us. We don't care how you get the money. And then you go chase that other guy for the money, right? And that's, so it depends on the structure and what you're due diligencing. In a shares, you're walking into the shoes. You're assuming all of those old contracts that they have, employment contracts, all of those severance liabilities, you're taking on all of that. In an asset sale, it's not the greatest analogy, but it's kind of like grocery shopping. It's like, yep, I want that, I want that, I want that. No, I don't want that. And here's my money, and that's it. But in a share sale, you're buying like you're buying the grocery store and all of its problems and all of it, good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
When you're purchasing into Chandler Bing's situation, which is like practicing 3 to 5 years, multiple clinics, have been in multiple clinics, saving money to buy a mid-sized practice in an older, more established area, like when they're looking at areas and they're buying like for that established clinic area, like again, would that be the same kind of timeline? You gather your team, we're looking at building that out, would you do it the same as you would buy a new clinic essentially, or build the new clinic? Would you kind of go through a similar process? And what kind of timeline would that take? Because like Brock said, for a new clinic, it would be like the fastest you could do it would maybe be a year. But what kind of timeline are we looking for buying an existing practice or transitioning into an existing practice?
Well, it's a lot quicker. It's a lot shorter timeline because it's a marketplace event. So when the clinic comes up for sale, if someone comes in and buys it before you or looks at it before you, then you lose that opportunity. So it's typically quicker. Again, you need to make sure, whether it's Brock or it's Tom or it's Ben or myself, that, let us know you're looking for a clinic, quietly. Everything's obviously confidential and we don't share any information with anybody. Let us know beforehand so that when something does come up, we can let you know, hey, this is coming up here. This is what it's going to be. Take a look at this, and the big thing I think, and everyone's kind of alluded to this, is that there is no perfect clinic to purchase. Like, you'll never find the perfect clinic that is your ideal clinic to purchase. You need to find something that's got a fantastic foundation and trust your ability to make it your perfection. So, there's going to be some stuff that you might not like. You might not like the hygienist. You might not like the hours of the clinic. It could be any number of things, but there's never going to be a perfect clinic. So if you can, and Brock can attest to this, there's lots of guys and girls who have been looking for clinics for years and years and years and years and years, and they've been shown everything that's come on the market and they've never found what they want. And they probably never will, because that ideal clinic isn't there. You need to find something that's as close to ideal for you and trust that you can make it your dream clinic. But back to the timeline it's kind of at the mercy of what the open market is doing. So, realistically, it's let us know that you're looking for something. And then when opportunities come up, we'll present them so you have the opportunity to make a decision on it.
Yeah, to add on to that as well, Chris, I think we've all at some point in our life have thought about or have purchased a home before. You don't just go and look and go, I like that $800,000 house, I'm going to go buy it. And then go to the bank and they go, you can afford $300,000. You want to make sure that you talk to your people like the Toms of the world and talk to the Bens of the world and be like, okay, where am I at? What can I do? What are my cash flow, cash in, cash out? What would the bank potentially approve me for? What am I willing to potentially take on versus my lifestyle? Those types of things. Then it will give you a rough idea of, I'm more in the $1.3 to $1.8 million practice range, not the $3 million practice range. So then we can work together with you, Chris, and find them the ideal spot within their range that they could go now find and build their own, quote unquote, perfect practice for themselves. And much to what you talked about, people looking and kicking tires and things like that. Those are the people that end up building. They look and 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 they look for the perfect one, and they go, oh, there's something wrong with this. I'm just going to build my own and make it custom. And that's a lot of the times where the builds come from. It's just people who have seen so many practices. They're just like, I just want my own. I want to do it the exact way I want to, and I'll build it in my likeness, which is successful. But, back to the whole cash flow thing, if you want to, maybe you have a family of 3 and you've got some debts and things like that, you probably don't want to be making no money. You'd probably want to go buy a practice that has some cash flow. And if it can service the debt and still pay you a handsome salary, then why would you not do it? Right. But much to your point, I think that, yes, you want to be as prepared as possible because it is a marketplace deal. And that clinic, if it's any good, will be gone probably before you even pick up the phone.
I would say,
go ahead, Tom.
With the clinic purchase, the fastest one I've ever seen done was abnormally fast, and it was like 20 days, and that was actually over Christmas too. And I'd say that it really varies. And I would say, well, how are you at emailing? That's really, because the dentist is usually a bottleneck, right? And I'd say you got to coordinate, your lawyer who's helping you on the lease. You want to read probably and communicate on what structure you're willing to agree to. and you got to answer the bank's questions and do all that stuff. So it has the potential to go really, really fast. It also has the potential to be bogged down quite a bit. If when you've signed an LOI on a practice, you just have a second job now. So you are doing due diligence. And again, it's probably the biggest expense of your life. So it would be prudent to take that second job that you just got, very seriously.
I would add to that too. There are different ways to purchase practices. So if you're going to come cold out and say, I'm going to go buy a practice, well, you can use the people that are on this call, and you can almost date the practice owner before you kind of get married to that practice. So if you go to a guy like Tom or myself or Chris or Ben, and you're like, hey, I'm thinking about potentially buying a practice, I probably have 4 people right now that would sell you a practice. It might not happen in a month, but you could go meet with them, have coffee, have a drink, go play golf, go to a hockey game, whatever it is, get a feel for them, get a feel for their practice before you even start the process. And then you just call Chris, get an appraisal done, and Bob's your uncle. It doesn't even hit market, right? So there's different ways to do it. It doesn't have to be the conventional way of, I got to wait till a practice comes on and then I got to go buy it. Because at the end of the day, much like you said earlier, Teresa, everything's for sale, right? You have the right amount of money, everything's for sale. So if you really want to practice, you got your eye on something and it's a good fit, and the doctor might be 45 or 50 looking to transition, it could be perfect. And we could kind of start that marriage before they even think of going and getting an appraisal done.
I think that's really, really smart. And I wasn't even aware of that kind of mode until my friend was telling me about her process. She just bought a practice and she literally did that kind of date before you buy for 4 years. This dentist thought, oh, I'm going to retire soon. And he kind of just wasn't really even looking for someone, but just knew that he was planning on transitioning out and kind of was just keeping his own eye on people that he found like-minded in his dentistry that you knew would take care of his patients the way that he wanted them taken care of when he left, and the ones that they would take care of his staff and run the clinic similar to how he ran the clinic. And it's like it was a giant process for him, right? Because some dentists, and I would say some, but most dentists are fairly control freaks. I want to say they like everything to be exact, and they like everything to be A to B in a straight line and start and complete. And so it's no different for them when they're transitioning out of a clinic. And I was even talking to another dentist today, and I said, well, eventually you're going to have to retire. And he's like, I don't even know. I don't want to talk about it. He can't even think about it, because he's like, I can't sell my practice. This is my baby, because he put it together for so long and this is his thing. Right. And I just said, well, you got to retire eventually. You can't just keep practicing until you're dead. So like, those are the things. So if you can find someone that is like-minded, that they want to work with, and you could potentially even bring them on as an associate for a short period of time and transition in. It's kind of like the Ross Geller situation too, right? Finding an associate that can transition into maybe a 5-year associate that is going to buy that clinic in the end, and kind of just work through that whole program just that way. And I think it's kind of a really smart plan if you're interested in an existing clinic and interested in not necessarily taking control of the entire situation right out the gate. Like when you buy an existing practice and you're just like, hey, one day you walk in, the next, 3 months later or 6 months later, the existing practice owner leaves. This is a great way to transition all of those patients and get them kind of feeling towards you and what your dentistry is like, and build up your own practice. And it seems like a little bit more of a safety net in the operational side as far as that goes, finding that marriage and working through. But it also has its downsides, because you could potentially be an associate there for a while and it might not work out, and then you've kind of wasted a few years of your life putting in something that may not turn out the way you wanted it. So yeah, it's kind of a different way to look at it. And I really do like that avenue though, because it does work out for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think you said something really important there too, is a lot of these dentists see it as their baby. So I think you want to be a little bit empathetic to the fact that they are selling something they've built for so long. And Chris can probably touch on this a little bit. You know, when you go buy a house, you can write a letter to the homeowner and you can maybe not be the highest bid, but they like you more because you got 2 kids and a dog. And you know what I mean? Like there's just some sort of personal connection there. So you might be able to get a practice, you know, maybe at a non-bidding war price, or, you know, but there may be some sort of empathetic connection there. And if you are empathetic to the fact that, yes, it is their baby. I mean, I think my car's worth more than it is. If someone wanted to buy my car right now, I'd be like, yeah, it's $1 million, right? My car is not worth the can of pop I'm drinking right now, but you know, you always think that what you have is worth a little bit more, right? So bringing on people like Chris to give you a hard line of what your practice is, and then if you do date, you might be able to touch on that empathetic aspect of it and get it at a reasonable price, and you don't get into that bidding war.
Yeah, I think ideally, you know, that it's a great scenario if you can be an associate in the clinic and then eventually buy it, because you're familiar with the processes, you know, the staff, you know, sort of how everything, treatment plans and how patients are dealt with, you know, the patients, which is a big thing. So the goodwill's worth something. I'm sure Tom could speak to this, you know, the hill sometimes where the fight or argument happens is that the associate who's now been there for 5 years has said, wait a second, I've built up this amount of the practice. You know, I've created this revenue here. Why am I buying back my revenue? Right? Why am I buying back what I created? And so a lot of times what we'll suggest, if you know, 2 or 3 years, and obviously this is a transaction that is, you know, I wouldn't be involved in if it's a private sale, which I'm fine with, which is great because that's more organic. But what I would suggest is that, you know, if you know this is going to happen 3 years out or 4 or 2 or whatever the term is, get the principal dentist to get evaluation done at that time, so we can get a snapshot of what the practice was before you created all this extra revenue. That way, when it comes time to sell it, you know, we update the numbers and the valuation, and we have a real good picture of what you created versus what was already at the clinic. But Tom, I'm sure you can speak to this, you know, a little better on that side of things.
Yeah, that's something that people point to frequently. They're like, well, I don't want to buy back my own revenue. Like, yeah, well, neither would I. However, you don't own the revenue. So that's a thing that people want to try to do. I think it's really hard to actually like think of it on, if you're the dentist who is the clinic owner and you're thinking about taking on a new young associate, and they come in there like, listen, I want to buy this right now. I'm going to blow this practice up and I'm going to make it grow. I'm doing what? Wait a minute, like settle down, person. Let's see you do a filling first before you come in here and say that you need to pay the value now, and then because you're going to make it, you know, double in size. And the reality of the associate dentist is that dental clinics are expensive to build. You know, there's 2 ways that can kind of be tackled, and I think one of the ways is really interesting. So the first way is exactly what you said, like, okay, well, once you've got a bit of a relationship, say, well, let's set the benchmark now, and then we can easily see what, you know, growth is arguably attributable to me. If I'm the selling dentist accountant, I would be like, how do you know it's exactly attributable to the new associate? Is it procedure based, or is it, oh, your recruitment led you to additional staff that made the dentist, you know, do very well, or you negotiated, you bought a CEREC and that saved money? Like, how do you know it's exactly attributable to the other dentist? So that would be some devil in the details there. So you have to keep careful track of that. And then the other way, which is interesting, will be a lot of the younger associates, and I'm really intrigued to see how this ultimately plays out. They're like, well, I have a Facebook page. I'm going to start my own personal I'm a dentist Facebook page for my patients. Okay, that's interesting, because you don't have a clinic in order to do the dentistry. But if you leave, how many of those patients will go? Your associate contracts were certainly going to have a restrictive covenant. So you won't be able to just go next door, or, you know, open up something next door. But that perhaps puts a bit of shifts the balance of power slightly to the associate. saying, well, I've built these all up and I've got 300 Facebook followers to my dental page, and 200 of those are patients here, so they're going to know when I leave and where I go. So then it's like, well, do you own the revenue then? Like, don't know. You don't have the infrastructure to be able to produce it, but some of it might follow you, and the selling dentist might not be able to do any of all that. So that's an interesting trend to me, and something that is just another area of potential due diligence risk. Like, what happens if you just bought, if you're buying a practice that has one associate and you're taking out the principal dentist, and the associate dentist that's there too, you decide you don't get along and they exit. Well, do they have one of those Facebook pages and they're going to take $300,000 of fees with them when they leave? They're not going to get all of them. Maybe they'll get some. Like, what does that do? It's just a different dynamic that caused me to pause and think when I saw it pop up.
So when a dentist is looking to hire an associate, do you ask to see the Facebook page? That is the question.
Yeah.
How many Facebook friends do you have?
Yeah.
Well, I also have seen where, they have restricted covenants, right, in the associate agreement, but because they were Facebook friends with all of their patients, and they had repeatedly talked to them throughout their career, they were considered friends, right? And so then they contacted them and let them all know that they were moved and they were outside of their mileage, and their patients followed them, and there was nothing that practice could do about it. So it is becoming very interesting, Tom. And as I'm watching unfold too, I've also seen people who have set up their own professional Google pages, business pages with their names on it, and asking for their own personal reviews. So that they now are getting their own SEO on their Google page, right? And so then they have 5-star reviews and whatever. And so I think that helps with the negotiating power with getting new contracts as an associate dentist. And that might be a good idea for a lifetime associate person, because you literally just change the address in Google businesses, and now all those Google reviews follow you wherever you are at whatever clinic you are. So times are changing, and it's becoming more dynamic in the control and the power balances now. And it's very interesting to watch unfold, and we'll just kind of see how fast legal catches up to that and what happens on that end. But right now it's kind of all over the map. So
yeah, it's really intriguing. So in the sense of, for Chandler again, it's like, okay, I'm going to do a paper purchase. Okay, well, how do you get along? If there's an associate there, like, who are they? How do you get along with them? But before, I think, a few years ago, you wouldn't worry about, oh, well, the associate's there, and if I don't want to pay the associate lots, I'll just take over that work. Now, maybe not so easy, depending on how that associate has structured their relationships with their patients.
Yeah, and built their practice within another practice, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
there's a lot of non-entrepreneurial gangster types out there as well. So if you're not the tech savvy, I'm going to go on Facebook and kind of create my own business within my business. There are different ways to kind of target opportunities for purchasing a practice as an associate, whether that be, find somebody who now you are the valuable asset in the practice. So if they start scaling back and they only work 3 days a week, and you're producing a lot of the production, and you're the one seeing a lot of the hygiene patients, things like that, you have some value there to that practice. Sure, you are building up the revenue, but does that look maybe at the time of renegotiating your associate contract? Can you put in a right of first refusal at that point? Or can you start to talk about potentially a small equity partnership where it's maybe 15, 20% in your first 3 years, where you're going to buy 50% and then eventually 100, or what does that look like? It doesn't have to be a cut and dry cold sale of I'm buying you out, leave now. You can really get creative with structuring how you want to kind of envelop yourself into the practice, and give yourself the opportunity to one day own 100% of it. But all of it also comes back to kind of the general theme of what we've been talking about all day amongst the 4 different tracks is you got to plan. and you got to use your team. Like there's so many things you could do that if you just ask Tom, for instance, I mean, he's, you know, I don't know if I'm allowed to say, but he's my accountant for my own personal stuff and my business. Like, you know, I bounce stuff off of Tom all the time, and he directs me one way or the other, whether I like the news or not. You know, it might be against what I want to do, but he's willing to give me that information. And, you know, as a dentist, you've got people around you who are willing to do that for you as well. And sometimes they're hard conversations because it's not what you want to hear, but it could help you in the long term.
Yeah, building. Go ahead, Ben.
Oh, I was just going to say, those are great comments, Brock. And in the financial world, one of the sayings that we often use is education replaces risk. And so when you surround yourself with the people that do it all the time, and they've seen a lot of it, and also if you're going to be working in a practice for a long period of time before you end up buying it, then it's kind of like living in a house for a while before you end up buying it. You know where all the creaks in the floor are, and you know where all the weaknesses are. So you've really educated yourself on that thing, which replaces the risk of the unknown.
Yeah, and I think just to reiterate and kind of recap everything here, planning, like Brock said, setting up your team, mitigating your risks, just being smart about the people that you have around you and your own restrictions in your own time, because you have to know that you can do it all if that's what you want to do, but can you do it all and still be a dentist at the same time? Or are you just going to burn yourself out, and that's going to affect your work and your production, there's just a lot of variables that go on. So yeah, you can totally do this by yourself if that's the way you want to go. But is it the best way for you? Probably not. So reaching out to people in the beginning, early doors, if that's what you're thinking about, is a really smart plan, and just getting the ball rolling and just getting information and education so that you can make smart decisions and planning your career, and just so that you know what you want to do and you can kind of move forward on the things that kind of excite you, and so that you can see that vision come to fruition. Because essentially, if you want to be an associate your whole career, that's the best thing. That's awesome. If you want to travel and do what you want to do, great, plan for it. You still have to plan to do all those wonderful things. If you want to buy or build your own clinic, and because you just can't find anything else that you like, get the people behind you to do that, because you're going to need help, and it's okay to ask for help to do that. If you're going to buy an existing clinic, if you need options in transitioning a clinic, just find the people that are going to help you, because it is the most important part of this whole process, because you don't have enough hours in the day to do what all of these people, even in this group, can do for you. It's just a team effort to make it your kind of end goal success. I really appreciate your guys' time tonight for spending this time talking and kind of giving a ton of information for me, and I'm sure our attendees as well. As we're going to record this and put it out on social media for people as well, because I think it's super important information, and probably a lot of things that I think junior dentists or dentists that haven't been out for very long don't even know to think about. And so even if they take away one tidbit of information, it's just been super valuable here, and I really appreciate that. So I'm just going to sign off. I really appreciate you guys having this with me, and thanks so much for being a part of this summit today.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Have a great night, guys. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.